Poetry itself. If I begin by talking about poetry, what is poetry? I will be talking in terms of the genres, how it is different from the other genres and so on, so that I will plunge myself into the same rigmarole, the same mode of rhetoric that I use into the literature classroom, so I don't want to do that. I just want to tell you about a few observations about poetry made by critics, or a few incidents that have happened, if I may. I will not take much time, I'll just be very quick and I'll come back to that. I would like to begin with one incident. This incident I have noted down. Here is one of a incident that happened in 1944. In 1944, one Hungarian poet, if you listen to this very carefully, I'll tell you one very interesting and very moving story about poetry. One Hungarian poet named Miklos Randoti was sent to a concentration camp in what is Yugoslavia today. When Joseph Broz Tito's Red Army was advancing, the occupants, they feared that they might be taking revenge upon them, so they were fleeing, and they sent this group of the people whom they had held in the concentration camp to go back to Hungary. On the way, these 21 people were butchered, killed, and buried in a grave. And after 2 years, several years in fact, the graves were exhumed. When they exhumed the graves, the wife of one of the persons who was killed also came. She recognized the body of her husband because there was a pocket book in which he had written 10 poems. One of the poems was addressed to her. The 10 poems are published today. It was such a moving story. Many people in the world have died like that. And the poem was addressed to her, which runs, I am alive, a prisoner, and all that I had hoped for, and I hope I will see you one day, type of poem. So the point is that in the 20th century, I didn't start by talking about what is poetry as in the classroom. I started by talking about the poetry that we used to live, poetry for witnessing things, poetry of witnessing things, life, today. So this is how I would like to begin about poetry. So poetry, W.H. Auden said when W.B. Yeats died, poetry makes nothing happen. It lives in the valley of its own saying. Poetry is totally useless. It makes nothing happen, he said. But in fact, poetry has made things happen. How do you...
Yeah, I mean, so poetry is something which you look up to when you look for something very deep, something very personal, which you can't express through rational text or rational prose. So I see that, the poem, and being a poet, in the sense, there's a very special relationship with words. And words, in a way, they're not normal anymore. Like when you are a student and you read a textbook, then these words are, you take them literally. But in poetry, there is nothing literal. When you were talking about the poet, the Hungarian poet, when he says prison, does he really mean prison, literally? Or it is a metaphorical prison, the prison of space-time, the prison of life itself. No, so in poetry, there's nothing as it seems. A stone is not a stone, a house is not a house, a microphone is not a microphone.
One literary theorist, French literary theorist, says, Baudrillard says, everything is simulacra. Nothing is real. He even as far as saying that the bombs that flew over, the sorties that flew over Iraq, they were not real planes, they were only simulacra. He drew a lot of flack criticism from people. Abhayji's idea is that poetry is actually not a direct pictorial representation of reality. Isn't that what you said? It's a metaphorical. Even the death of this poet here could be metaphorical, but that is a very real death.
So,
yes,
so let me, I mean, one of the things which, most of the poets, they don't really realize. So let me ask you this question, that when did you realize that you were a poet? Or, at what stage of your academic or literary career it came to you that you are a poet? You are nobody else but a poet.
I realized long before I became a scholar that those sentiments in me. When I was young, I saw a child in a cradle being rocking a child. I realized suddenly that there was some character that drew my emotion. And I didn't know what to do, and then I just started writing a little bit. And I was looking for some power, some mode of expression, and then I wrote. Toya Bhattara is sitting there, he was my student in Tehradum, he is familiar with that. I wrote in words. I wrote about the child. I was also a teenager, I wrote about the child. And when I wrote about the child, I realized that, there was something else, there is power in words. The emotions that I had, I was able to put in words, which later I found always to be true. I just want to mention one about a German poet called Paul Celan. Paul Celan was a Jewish poet whose parents were killed in Auschwitz. And he was exiled in France, and he was a German. He wrote in German language, exiled in France. And he didn't have the medium actually. He was alienated. Writing in his own language became alien, and it was the language used by the Nazis. So he decided to destroy the structure of the language, the grammar. When he destroyed the structure of the grammar, he realized that he had created extra sensitivity to the words. So just the words, if you read Paul Celan's poetry, it just looks like mad, there's no word order and no good grammar and so on. So that child's experience perhaps was very similar to that experience. That there was no grammar, but there was sensitivity in words. That is how I realized.
And when you started calling yourself...
Later on I became worse and worse because I became very conscious of grammar and even a teacher of literature.
You see, most of the poets, they disguise themselves. They never introduce themselves as poets. Some of them would...
What about you? When did you realize
Some of them would say, I am the teacher, I am the professor of English literature. Some would say that, I teach English. Some would say, I teach poetry. Some would say that, but they would never introduce themselves as poets. The 1996 Nobel laureate in literature, Wisława Szymborska, in her Nobel acceptance speech, she said that, there are poets across the world. It's not only about Poland, but across the world, they are ashamed of being poets. They hesitate saying, I'm a poet.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, because I don't really come across, people who say that I'm a poet. It's introduction is never direct. They would say, I write some poetry, and so on. So they come around sort of, but going somewhere and introducing yourself as a poet, I think it's a very challenging thing. It's a very so when did you start? I mean, did you ever introduce yourself as I'm a poet?
That's a good question. In English, I think good question means difficult question. When I went to Britain and sat in the class of the university room, one professor said to one student's question, that's a good question. And I thought he was admiring the students because he asking good questions, Gatilo question. But good question means difficult question, I realized. That's a good question. I don't remember ever introducing myself as a poet. Because I realized But I realized yesterday, Abhay said, we will read some of our own poems, bring some of your published poems, he said. And suddenly I realized, I had several collections of poems. Like Chasing Dream is one, which was staged in Kathmandu at the Russian Cultural Center by English department teachers and others. Even Professor Bhandari played a role in that. That's a poem. I wrote Dreams of Peace Blossom, a poetic play, poetry. That's poetry which Dr. Sivarizal directed and performed in Kathmandu. And I have many other collections of my poems are published in Bengal Lights recently. But I feel very shy about showing people. Many people even haven't seen those books. So that shyness is probably the strongest.
So, there's a fundamental question which all of us...
Why do you think that, what is your opinion about? Why
that's why that's why I'm trying to share with because I see there are lots of poets here. So, poets, when it comes to defining a poet, how do you define a poet? So, the best definition of a poet I have ever come across is by a Russian poet and a Nobel laureate, Brodsky, Joseph Brodsky. And he says that, poetry, to be a poet, it means that, you are addicted to the ecstasy of poetry, the dose of poetry, as an alcoholic or a drug addict is addicted to drugs or alcohol. So you need it. You need it in the morning, you need it in the evening, you need it at night. So that means to be a poet. Is that with you?
I remember one very famous statement made by Olson, American poet Olson. He says, I am an archaeologist of the morning. Can you make a sense? Archaeologist of the morning. He digs on and on into the morning. What does he dig into the morning? He says that about poetry. And Walter Benjamin, another very great scholar, Jewish scholar, of course German, whom I admire very much. My students also who are sitting here, they use him a lot. He says, contrary to what I think it's similar experience. He says, poetry, being poetic, being voluntarily trying to live with the trauma. He says so. Maybe it's a different name for ecstasy. Trying to live with the trauma. So poetic feelings and poetic experience is a traumatic experience. Why trauma? Because you bandy with your feelings, you toy with your feelings, you suffer with such a lot of ruptures, you create some cracks in you, you shift from one position to another, and in that process you become the victim of your own. So every poet is a poetic experience, it's a traumatic experience. Of course he was a Jewish person, he had suffered a lot, his family. Maybe he's saying from that background, but I think it's not very different from what it said, ecstasy. Ecstasy, another side of ecstasy is trauma also, like talking in philosophical terms, Kant calls sublime as the expression of the fear. Intense expression of the fear is what he calls sublime. So maybe these two categories are the same. In other words, now we have perhaps come to one conclusion. The conclusion is that, as Abhay said, as I've been trying to say, is that poetic experience is not a straightforward experience. It is something that is either voluntarily acquired, not necessarily acquired, but practice, experience. Walter Benjamin also says that Caroline Fosse, one good poet of America, who says that the effect of poetry doesn't come like a sortie, a plain attack, It takes a long time to come. So that is the kind of an experience, poetic experience, I guess. So and I personally, I don't remember whether I felt ecstatic, maybe more ecstatic than traumatic.
So that brings us to, what is good poetry? Or how do you test? It's like testing a good amount of cocaine or good amount of heroin, So I guess that you haven't read something very, very powerful in last in recent times, most probably, that's the reason you haven't felt ecstatic or traumatic or.
That trauma is. Actually, of course, I've been reading. That's one genre I read a lot, and I have also read about simplicity in poetry. For example, I'm a great reader of Japanese poetry. Recently, I've been reading Japanese poetry. Walter Benjamin again says that modernism is a trend that cuts an individual from one's own root, makes the individual alienated, and makes the individual surrender to the power that alienates him or her. But this question of surrender should be looked slightly differently when you talk in terms about Japanese poetry. Matsuo Baso is 16th century American haiku poet. He has written a very famous haiku. The haiku goes like this: old pond, lip splash of frog. So surrendering to the water is expanding, not losing oneself. So these are different interpretations.
So let me, this is something which I have.
So recently I'm reading a lot of Paul Celan.
Paul Celan, fine. I'm trying to take you to Chitwan actually from Paul Celan. So there's this poem because you brought Baso. So I'll read you one of the poems called Chitwan. I guess most of you have been to Chitwan,
yes.
And it has influence of the Japanese poetry, but it's different. So a river filled.
Are you reading a poem?
It's a small one.
Yes.
A river.
Read a few more poems.
No, just to kind of continue with that. A river filled with crocs.
A river
filled with crocodiles.
Oh, see. A river filled with crocs.
A canoe filled with dreams.
A canoe filled with dreams.
Rowing.
That's beautiful.
Airy silence in the jungle.
Eerie silence in the jungle.
An elephant riding a human.
An elephant riding a human.
Trees strolling. Trees strolling. Statue of a frail man. At the central square. Statue of a frail man at the central square in the city of rhinos. So that's
it's a
Chitwan.
very interesting juxtaposition. I like the way you recreated urban memories into the jungle. In my own way, I understand this poetry as being a city man's little bit of a traumatic experience realized in the jungle. Perhaps Benjamin was indicating at that. Tell me about your experience of the India. How did you come across? Your poems are full of images from Indian culture, Indian history, your encounter of the world. There is one secret, don't tell others. His first collection is about love poetry. He fell in love in Moscow and got married to a wonderful lady. And the poems written in the first collection is full of love. How did you come across these experiences, Indian experience of love, and the collection which is coming out soon? I have also written some text on the blog for this wonderful collection about the monuments of Delhi. What is the process? What is the gradual process of your coming to terms with from love to the old monuments? Can you tell us very briefly about it?
I would not speak of love that runs in my veins.
Okay, silent. That is silent.
I would not speak of love.
Oh, he's reading poetry.
That runs in my veins, nourishing every cell of my existence. Rather, I would cherish in silence.
Rather, you would cherish in
Rather, I would cherish in silence fruits of love.
But you do write and publish a poem about that.
No, this is a poem, and I have, I mean, for me, love is, it's only 4 words. And this is this is also a poem, but only 4 words.
Explain quickly. You have used a very...
It's and how I see love. Beautiful silence.
Beautiful silence.
Silent violence.
Silent wilds.
Silent violence. Silent
Violence.
violence.
Oh.
Violent silence.
Violence is Indian pronunciation.
No. Violent silence.
Violent silence.
Beautiful violence.
Beautiful violence. Beautiful poem. I myself came across this poetically when I came to Kathmandu. I was awed to see this old city. And I kept this feeling in my mind for a long time. I went to Britain as a student and I did Scottish country dancing, sang Scottish songs, and met so many people and became so many different things. Before I actually wrote a poem about Kathmandu in English. Writing poem in English is to hide that you are a poet. Because if you write in English, nobody reads, and that is the most comfortable position. So I wrote a poem about Kathmandu, and this poem was staged. I just want to read an extract.
This is your book.
Yes, my book. 25 years. I have rolled my eyes many times down the hills of your burgeoning disbelief. In this village of the gods, whose wives stray from the path only to be rescued by men from the boondocks, who write the tragedy, who write the tragicomedy, who write the farce, who write the melting words, who stand under the signboard and talking their holy threads over their ear, urinate on the wall of rigidity like Brahmins urinate under the sun, get lost. That's okay. Perhaps it is okay because I didn't know I was ever found. Where did you find me? In my words, hurt with words, over the horse, running under the clouds, over the bed where you fall like a storm, over you under the garden bush, hemmed in by the city's smoky pall. In this city, one who is never found cannot get lost. That is fine. I'll look for the sun in the gutters, in the Bagmati, murky waters. I'll search for my time. My dreams, the dreams of a village boy, me, in the garbage hills of these metropolitan times. Get lost in the guitar you played. Manjul comes here. He taught me how to sing with the wind's fingers. I'll go to the bazaar and buy bitter leaves just for you, oh my darling. बजारै जान्छु नि पान किने ल्याउँछु कान्छीलाई भनेर मजम फुलको सिंगार क्यो जोवान. Get lost. No, I didn't. Many times I stumble over those words, but return to these lanes with more words, alien but warm like the morning's avalanche of sun. Step gaily on we go, hill per hill and to. This is Scottish. Step gaily on we go, hill per hill and to per to. Amanaram roven row, all for Mary's wedding. Savla, my village. Savla, Scotland, London, Kathmandu. And there was a signboard at New Road. The nose is pricked here with the machine. Would you like to read some of your poems?
No, not from that. But you read Kathmandu, so I'll read Delhi. And
Okay, done. Okay.
And of course, I remember. I think one of the
more poems.
One of the things which modern poets they always carry the book. They forgot. Now they have forgotten to remember their poems, and they look at the book and read their poems. I guess a poet must remember his or her poems. So here is a poem on Delhi.
Because I always hide.
And it's from my forthcoming book called Seduction of Delhi, So Delhi, also because Kathmandu, you were talking about the gutter and the Bagmati, and when was that? At 84 or something? Or 90? When
It's always that, but I wrote it. Shiva, when did we stage this?
Yeah, so since
96?
90s. So here is Delhi. My smell, my nakedness entices hordes of human flesh from faraway lands. My smell, my nakedness entices hordes of human flesh from faraway lands, traders, emperors, marauders. I pose nude up on the hill. I pose nude up on the hill below the feast of eagles.
Wow, beautiful.
Possessed, intoxicated.
Carry on a few more.
Few more on you mean on Delhi?
I'm testing his memory.
No, see. No, because I can't read too many poems. You have only read one on Kathmandu, so that's one on Delhi.
Oh, okay, later.
If you read a poem on Bagmati, I'll read on Yamuna.
My Bagmati River poems is very I have written one about Chittaun also, but I didn't want to read that. There may be Kathmandu sun. Shall I read that? It's about Kathmandu sun. Kathmandu, with its many suns, many mouths, speaks. To be tourist, it speaks with an antique mouth, with a mind chiseled in petrified rhetoric. But to us, it speaks with engine mouths. We oscillate with the murky sun under a pall of smoke. After sliding across garbage hills, the sun languishes in the city's last resorts. Children help it out of gutters. Women oil its weary back and bottom in primitive yards. Clammy, it rushes, often takes a dive in the holy Bagmati. After a wallow, the sun merges into Babel, panicking like every one of us for a language that we'll all have to speak tomorrow.
So Yamuna.
Yamuna, okay.
I flow past Delhi like a sliver of dark silver, caressing city's shores. I flow past Delhi like a sliver of dark silver, caressing city shores, draining darkness from Delhi's soul.
Yes, turning to the cultural places for poets is a very important and very powerful example. Poets draw inspiration actually from not only the living world, living reality, but also from a past that survives either in arts or in old texts or old monuments as in Kathmandu, as in Bhaktapur. South Asia is full of that. Many years ago, I wrote a play actually. A play which I set to Bhaktapur. And this play is a poem actually. It's a short. As a play, it is a very short one. As a poem, it is a longer one. And we performed this play, Dreams of Peach Blossom, which Dr. Sivarijal performed in Kathmandu first, and then in Nepal, Sunil Pokrel performed. We performed in Bangladesh, India, in Europe also. But what always struck me was the original thoughts, the moment that inspired me to write this play. I just would like to read a few lines from the poem that was originally played by Manjul in Nepali. Poet Manjul played this role. on stage, but in English someone else, Nagendra, played. Time freezes in fingers that cease to pluck at the sitar and play tabla. In the midst of the people who sat around here, like peach blossom under the sky of this wooden color. Nathapol breaks the sky in 5 resplendent layers in the sun and rainbow. Eros spoke on carvings on the struts, shapes of sounds, but dreams were here, are here now. They were the dreams for those who live behind the carved out wood. Oh, listen to the sound of water in the dry lake. Listen to the rustle of wind on the trees that only stand in shadows as memories on the treeless backyards. Time here is silhouette. He speaks of this time in the language of no words. So my perception is that
I see that many people in the audience are they're taking a side.
I remember several of your poems in this forthcoming collection. Admiring your power to remember. May I ask you to remember if you...
No, I think, let's try to answer this question to the audience. How many of people really read poetry?
How many of the people...
How many people really read English poetry, what we write?
That's why I started writing in English, because I didn't want anybody to read it. Because there were feelings I wanted to write, and didn't want also to be in the game of being a poet. It's a lot of trouble. It's like being in love, Falling in love is like writing poetry, because it takes a lot of time. And so I didn't have that, so I fell in love, but secretly. And so I chose English medium to write. My answer is that many people perhaps don't do read or don't read, because many people who are sitting here, if they are from the Department of English, they have read and passed the examination by writing correctly about the poet and the lines where they occur. So they are definitely read English poems, but I'm not sure about the rest of the people in India. Okay, you answer that question. You are in a better position to answer that question because you come from India. You are an Indian poet in English. K.K. Daruwala, I know Indian poets. Many Indian poets I know. Makaranda Paranjapi, I know.
When you know the academic poets anyway. So there are two kinds of poetry. One is what is taught in the universities, what the academics like professor teach, and there is poetry when you need poetry. When you are in need of inspiration, somebody has died in family and you need a poem, or somebody is born in family and you are so excited you need a poem. So do you go to look for English poetry, or do you look for the Lakshmi Prasad Devkota or Kabir, Ramdhari Siddhinkar?
Just before that, I just want to use one analogy here. When you pass through a green channel, you say nothing to declare. And you pass through the channel. As a poet, I don't say nothing to declare. I may say I have nothing to declare, but I give hiding love inside my heart. Because people don't normally bother about who carries love around, So whenever I go around the world, I say nothing to declare, but there is something else. I'm hiding like a bad passenger. I'm always hiding, but I always choose the green channel. And
Why?
I read both kinds of poems, like Pablo Neruda I read. He's a great favorite poet of mine. Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. Siddhi Charan Shrestha is my very favorite poet.
You have been, I think, awarded with Siddhi Charan Shrestha
Yes,
award
yes.
or something. Anyway, so
I don't know why they awarded, but they did award.
That's what you said, he's your favorite poet. So what I'm trying to say is that, why publish...
Not because of that, otherwise I would have got a Nobel Prize because I like Pablo Neruda.
Pablo Neruda... anyway, Pablo Neruda is a great poet. So,
Paul Celan, Baudelaire, these are my great favorite poets.
So,
and T.S. Eliot, of course, I like.
Now let's talk a little bit about the literature's great divide, in the sense, poetry is always considered to be the poor cousin of prose in the terms of, publishers.
I may not agree with it.
Publishers don't want to touch poetry,
Yes,
you have
from the publisher's point of view, that's fine.
So how do you get your poems published? Do you self-publish them, or, do you pay for you pay for publishing poetry, or how?
This Dreams of Changing Dreams was published by Mandala Madam Lal Marjan, and the second book was published by a colleague, also my student, Professor Dr. Sangeeta Rai Maji. I don't know where she is now. She went to America, and she was a good writer
so
also.
Why isn't it Penguin or HarperCollins or
and they published that book. And after that, I have a collection of poems ready for publication. I have not found any publisher. The reason is that I have not approached anybody. That's the reason.
But why? I mean, in the sense, why the bigger publishers, they don't want to touch poetry, and they don't want to really publish poetry. Even if they publish, it's with lots of obligation and lots of
Yes.
they're doing a favor to you. And second thing, that why do we need poetry books? In the sense, a poem is enough, because poem itself, a single poem is a unit in itself. It conveys what you want to convey. You don't need to have a whole collection of a poem in a book form. So why do we need poetry books?
I would address that question from two perspectives. The first is that we are all readers of poetry. We grew up reading poetry. I grew up reading Bhanubhakta's Ramayana. My mother chanted, and I can recite the poems. Ramayana, many sloka. The reason is that we, in this subcontinent, all of us have read poetry. We grew with poetry, and we read the translation. By the way,
you mean even Prajwal reads poetry?
Yes. I mean, we all read translations. We read the Mahabharata, we read the Ramayana, Kirtivasa Ramayana, Kalidas, Tulsidasa Ramayana, Bhanubhakta, and Kashi Ramadasa. We all read the translations. For example, in Nepal also we read translation. In Europe, everybody reads translation because the Bible was translated. All the Europeans are the readers of translated texts. In Japan, I worked for about little over a year at Tokyo University, and I found that within 5 minutes of the publication of the bestseller, they translate. They are the readers of translation. So everybody reads translation, and people have been reading poetry through translation. Walter Benjamin says that unless the translator himself or herself is a poet, it is very difficult to produce the translation. So translation. But coming back to your question, why aren't the big publisher interested in publishing poetry? Is perhaps because I think people publish fiction because fiction is more easily sellable than poetry. That is one direct answer. I think that's the best answer. Because fiction is sold more extensively, more widely than poetry. That was the experience of my friends in Britain. My friends in Britain, my poet friends.
Not all kind of fiction, but more of a variety of 50 Shades of Grey. Which is a best-selling. It sold more than 50 million copies. But I was looking at the data of the Pulitzer Prize winning novels. They have sold, I think, one was 7,867. And the Sharon Old, who won both the Pulitzer Prize and T.S. Eliot Prize, which are the biggest prizes in poetry, she sold 1,600 copies. So I think it's the 50. We should write more of 50 Shades of Grey. What do you think?
I think some of the bestseller fictions are good fiction. Very good fictions are also become bestseller. Only yesterday I was attending the conversation about short story. Like why Parajuli's short stories are liked by people in Nepal is because the stories are good. Very good stories. I also read some. But you are very right that some of the serious works written in the past by novelists, big novelists remain obscure. People didn't discover them only very late in their own literary traditions. So all the best writers, good writers for that matter, are not sold extensively as widely as some of the texts, some of the works are. My point is that when talking about poetry,
I think, I mean, I would like to add to that or disagree with you. Poetry,
Yes.
It's not sellable, but poetry is not marketed. I mean, as fiction or as short stories, are marketed, poetry is not marketed that way, I believe. And
I have seen one very wonderful example of poetry marketing. I was passing through Ratna Park, it was evening time. Two guys were selling poetry. And they were reading poetry, they were wearing very dark glasses. Apparently they couldn't see the letters, but they knew, by memory. Sasu भन्छ बुहारी बुहारी भन्छ घिउ जिउ केहीमा राखेको कसले खायो घिउ. That was the kind of poem they were selling. And the poetry was being sold very fast. It was evening, it was quite dark, and they were wearing dark glasses and standing and singing poetry.
and you bought a copy.
I did not. I did not because so that is the kind of a promotion of poetry I have seen in some places. In Britain, at the Edinburgh Festival, which I attended for three different consecutive years, where I met even heard the very prominent poets like Ted Hugh and Seamus Heaney and others, and Stephen Spender and others. There, after their reading, I saw some people buying some of their poetry collections, but not as quite extensively as they did buy the fiction books. And I'm a playwright, by the way. We perform plays. We take plays to so many different places, but nobody buys my books. We have hardly sold 15 copies of the play that we perform.
I think, we will have to request Ajit to have another conversation because we are only halfway and it's time for the audience to ask questions.
No, let's talk for a while. Oh, I see. It's nearly finished. Question. Pink shirt or red shirt? Now we go by short.
Thank you for having me. Such a wonderful evening. Respected Abhi Subedi. As a matter of fact, I knew about you when I was in grade 11, and it's been long. I've been longing to meet him and interact with him. It's such a wonderful pleasure having to meet you, sir. A lot of respect to you, and equal respect to
Abhay,
yeah.
Abhay KG.
Yeah, and
KG,
my name is
KG is not the weight.
You can. He just has to. He just have to call me by my first name, Abhay.
I'm sure I'm going to make it very quick because so many questions coming up. In fact, so many young writers we have come across so far. Ravi Thapa, we have Prajwal Prazuli, and my concern over here is does action, when we speak English, this question goes to Abhi Subedi, sir. Actually, I have read so many articles of yours and your writing and so on. I thought your action would be pretty much like Western action, but it is typically of who you are and typical Nepalese action. Does it matter for us to actually imitate Western action, or does it matter for us to actually speak the way West speak in English? Thank you, sir. That's all.
I might sound very funny if I start speaking English in a British style. If I go around speaking English like British, like the British side, people would look at me and think, "Oh, what a funny man there." So I don't want to speak in that kind of accent. You are very right. You spotted my pronunciation. Thank you very much. It does make a difference. Here, this lady here in the city. What is the shirt color of the shirt? Blue.
Abhi sir,
Maybe we can hear you.
Abhi sir,
Yes.
हजुरलाई मनपर्ने सम्झना भएको एउटा कुनै गजब नेपाली कविता सुनाउ न. गजब.
भोलि एकछिन यो क्वेसन देऊ त.
यो नेपाली कविता थियो.
ल ल सर.
More than a question, I think I would put some comment on like why poets wouldn't come forward as poets. Okay. I think like when we are talking about why poets do not come forward, introducing them as a poet, because for many poets, I think there are some categories they put themselves up for first, to be called a poet, maybe they would say that they're not good enough as the poets they've been reading. They've not published as much as they've been reading about. So, do you think that actually matters?
Yes, some poets may create a persona. In the past, they used to, strategy was to take a pen name like Bethit or Nirala or Ghayal or something like that. And that is how they accentuated that poetic personality. And some drank a lot of washa. That was one mark of being a poet. Another mark was walking with bleary eyes and talking less and pretending to be forgetful. These are some of the marks which are still favorable marks of poets. I think there's no need to
or shaving the head or keeping a little bit hair.
He is indicating at me, but this is a very natural process. I'm losing my hair. This is nothing of my own doing. This one. Yes, Nepal ta आउँदैन त हौ अहिले त्यो ल्याउँदै ल्याइन पढ्छु नि यहाँ छ नि नेपाली.
Sir, excuse me.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. My respected guru. So your poetry is in all the time mixture of politics in Nepal. I think poetry is creative work so far I know, but your poetry shows color of politics in Nepal. So why, sir? Very short answer I need.
I just would like to read. One woman says to a king who is an oppressor, रगत बगाउनुहुन्छ आफू र भन्नुहुन्छ यो स्वास्नी मान्छेले गरेकी हो, निर्दोषलाई मार्नुहुन्छ र भन्नुहुन्छ यो इतिहासमा स्वास्नी मान्छेले खेलेको भूमिका हो. तपाईको इतिहास एक चिहान हो जसमाथि तपाईँ यस्तो शिलापत्र लेखेर राख्नुहुन्छ, यसभित्रकी स्वास्नी मान्छे सधैँ अदृश्य थिए. This is politics, but also poetry. But that's a line from a play, poetic play. We perform this.
Yes, the great poetry has always, two elements, and one is history, and another is the human. What happens to individuals because of that history? So, and it combines these two. It combines ecstasy and irony. It combines history and trauma in the sense it all comes under the human angle.
सर नमस्कार. मेरा कहना यह है कि जो रामधारी सिंह दिनकर के जो सबसे महत्वपूर्ण एक कविता है वो 4 पंक्ति आप सुनाएंगे यहाँ.
सुनाइए. दिनकर की
अभय सर सुनाए.
दिनकर.
अभय सर मैं भी सुना सकता हूँ लेकिन अभी
श्री कृष्ण हस्तिनापुर आए, पांडवों का संदेशा लाए, दे दो केवल 4 ग्राम, रखो अपनी धरती तमाम, हम उसी में खुशी से खाएंगे, परिजन पर असीन उठाएंगे, दुर्योधन वो भी दे न सका, आशीष समाज की ले न सका, उल्टे हरि को बांधने चला, जो था असाध्य साधने चला.
I recite one poem to you written by Prasad, who is Rajprasad Devagota, often quoted. शांत सरोवर के उर किस इच्छा से लहरा कर हो उठते हैं चंचल चंचल. There was the great interaction among the poets of Nepal and India, the Chayavadi tradition. It comes all the way from Rabindranath Tagore. So my point is that there was a great, let's talk about, there is no time, but we would have loved to talk about South Indian poetry, where there is a lot of cross currents across the languages in South Asia. I've just returned after attending a conference, Sufi conference in Jaipur, in a place where the Jaipur festival is organized by the same man, the same Thakurji. I heard poets and met them, and I found that the poets in South Asia are looking forward to interacting more through the medium of translation. Translation is a very powerful medium and also the most dangerous medium. I tell you one incident. Rabindranath Tagore wrote one English friend when he was very old one letter. He said, all my life I have been translating for you gentlemen to suit your taste, to make it easy for you, and I've destroyed my poetry. I will no longer do that. I will never translate for you, he said. So translation is a very dangerous thing. And in Nepal, I have noticed that many works are being translated, especially poem, in a very bad manner, and very good poets are being systematically being destroyed one by one. So that we should be very careful about that matter.
Good evening, Abhi sir and Abhay. Me Sarvagya Kafle from Hetauda. My query is, as a poet, how would you consider the role of performance poetry that such forums provide for the promotion of poetry that is actually low in the market in terms of publication? And also, especially for Abhi sir, how would you see the nexus of theatre and this performance mode of poetry?
That's a question after my heart. That's a very dear question.
Let me answer the first part.
First part you will answer, second part I will answer, maybe that will be the last part.
You know, the poetry has always been and always will be, you know, a performance art. It's the poets always recited their poems earlier. You know, they did not have the book to book with them all the time, and they used to recite their poems. So poetry has been an oral art. It's been, you know, there's a specific importance of the way you recite poetry. Sounds, tones, everything. So performance poetry brings back the tradition of poetry as it has been, and it will help to revive poetry in this part of the world. I know that performance poetry or slam poetry is already a big thing in the West, in New York and other cities. And Kathmandu too, there are lots of performance poets now. We have the word warriors and so on. And I think that poetry is getting back to its roots.
I would like to add to that, the point is that Abhay told you, he was speaking about the performance poetry that has been growing in the metropolitan areas, city areas. But I see that your question has another side. The side is that the originary of poetry, from where the poem comes, what's the root of the poem, the strength of performance always in poetry comes from the people, common people. Until and unless we go to the people and discover the poetry, the originary, I would call that originary, we cannot create a powerful performative poetry. So that is what we have been trying to do in our plays. That is our ambition. A lady at the very far at the back, a lady, what color are you wearing? White? You just stand up. Yes, please.
She doesn't have the mic, I guess.
Microphone, please, for the lady. Oh, finish? Oh, one other lady came and finished it all. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think your audience has been great. Thank you.
Wonderful audience. I never realized I would have written poems and performed